I'm Octavia Thorne, 32, and I was once the most sought-after art restorer in the tri-state area before my life was systematically dismantled by the man I trusted most. I stand in the middle of the crowded ballroom, feeling like a ghost haunting my own funeral. The chandeliers above are blinding, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on my vintage black dress that I've mended 3 times. I clutch a glass of lukewarm tap water because I can't afford the $20 flute of champagne the waiters are circling with. I am not here to party. I am here because I am desperate. I need a commission. I need one person in this room to remember my talent instead of the scandal Julian fabricated to destroy my credibility. My fingers are white-knuckled against the glass. I tell myself to breathe. I tell myself to look professional. Then the room goes quiet. The heavy oak doors at the top of the staircase swing open. A hush ripples through the crowd, followed by the frantic clicking of camera shutters. I look up and the air leaves my lungs in a violent rush. It's him, Julian, my ex-husband. He looks exactly the same as the day he threw me out of our townhouse, only richer. His tuxedo fits him like a second skin. He radiates that arrogant, untouchable aura that used to make me feel safe but now makes me feel nauseous. But he isn't alone. Clinging to his arm is a woman who looks like she was sculpted from porcelain. She is young, perhaps 22, with hair the color of spun gold and a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Calla, I know her name because I've seen it splashed across every tabloid in the city for the last 6 months. She is the upgrade, the replacement, but it's not her youth that stops my heart. It's what is resting against her throat. A sapphire, deep velvet blue surrounded by a halo of diamonds. The midnight star. I feel the blood drain from my face. Julian promised me that necklace. We had picked it out together at an auction 3 years ago. He told me he was saving it for our 10th anniversary. He told me it was a symbol of our endurance. Now it hangs around the neck of a woman he's known for 6 months. The cruelty of it is so precise, so calculated, that I almost admire the craftsmanship of his malice. He spots me. I try to shrink back into the shadows of a large fern, but his eyes lock onto mine like a predator sensing a wounded animal. A slow, terrifying smirk spreads across his lips. He doesn't turn away. He doesn't guide Calla toward the VIP section. He steers her directly toward me. My legs feel like lead. I want to run, but I am frozen in place, trapped by social convention and sheer shock. They cut through the crowd, the sea of wealthy donors parting for them. I can smell him before he even stops. Sandalwood and expensive leather. The scent brings back a flood of memories I have tried to drown: mornings in bed, coffee on the balcony, the lies he whispered against my neck. Octavia, he says, his voice is smooth, devoid of any guilt. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought this event was above your current bracket. The insult lands like a slap. My throat is dry. I grip my water glass tighter, terrified my hand will shake and betray me. I was invited, Julian. Charity invite, I assume. He chuckles, a low, rumbling sound that used to make me laugh. Now it sounds like a car engine revving over a body. He turns to Calla, squeezing her hand. Calla, darling, this is Octavia, my first wife, the one I told you about. Calla looks at me. Her eyes scan me from head to toe, lingering on the fraying hem of my dress. She offers a tight, pitying smile. Oh, the fixer. Julian said you were good with broken things. The double meaning hangs in the air, toxic and heavy. She reaches up and touches the sapphire necklace, her fingers caressing the stone that was supposed to be mine. It's a territorial gesture. She is marking her property. It's lovely to meet you, she lies, her voice sugary sweet. Julian has told me so much about how difficult things got for you toward the end. I feel the heat rising up my neck. They are enjoying this. They are feeding on my humiliation. I look at Julian, searching for a shred of the man I loved for a decade, but I see nothing but cold ambition. He brought her here specifically for this moment. He put that necklace on her specifically to break me. That necklace, I whisper, the words escaping before I can stop them. It's beautiful. Julian's grin widens. He knows he has won. Isn't it? I wanted Kala to have the best. She appreciates quality. She understands the value of things, unlike some people who let their assets depreciate. He is talking about me. He is talking about my career, my reputation, my life. I feel tears pricking the back of my eyes, but I refuse to let them fall. I will not give him that satisfaction. My stomach churns violently. I need to leave. I need to get out of this ballroom before I shatter into a million pieces right here on the marble floor. I have to go, I manage to say, my voice trembling. Running away again, Octavia. Julian taunts, stepping closer, invading my personal space. Some things never change. You were always too weak for this world. I take a step back, my heel catching on the carpet. I stumble, barely catching myself. Water sloshes over the rim of my glass, splashing onto my hand. It's pathetic. I look pathetic. Julian laughs and Kala joins him, a tinkling, cruel sound that echoes in my ears. The people around us are starting to stare. I am the entertainment. I am the cautionary tale. I look down at the floor, wishing it would open up and swallow me whole. I have lost everything. My husband, my career, my dignity. And now I am standing here being mocked by the architect of my destruction while he parades my stolen future in front of my face. I have never felt so small. I have never felt so alone. Careful, Julian whispers, leaning in close to my ear. You don't want to make a mess. You can't afford the cleaning bill. I close my eyes, bracing for the final blow to my pride, but it doesn't come. Instead, the air pressure in the room seems to shift. The murmurs of the crowd die down instantly. A shadow falls over us, tall and imposing. Is there a problem here? A deep voice resonates from behind me. The voice is unfamiliar. It is cold, authoritative, and dangerously calm. Julian's smirk falters. Kala stops laughing. I open my eyes and turn around slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'm Octavia Thorne, 32, and until 6 months ago, I was a respected art restorer with a life I thought was unbreakable. But now I am standing in a borrowed dress, trembling before the man who stole my future. I turn around slowly to face the source of the deep voice that has just cut through the humiliation like a blade. But my mind is not on the stranger standing behind me. My mind is being violently dragged back to the day my life shattered. My heart hammers against my ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic, bruising rhythm that makes my vision blur at the edges. Standing this close to Julian, smelling that familiar sandalwood scent, triggers a physiological panic I cannot control. The ballroom fades. The murmuring crowd dissolves. Suddenly, I am not in a gala. I am back in the cold, gray light of our townhouse library on that Tuesday morning. I remember the silence first. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the suffocating stillness of a tomb. I had walked in holding a cup of tea, expecting to discuss our weekend plans. Julian was sitting behind the mahogany desk, my grandfather's desk, with a stillness that should have warned me. He didn't look up when I entered. He just slid a manila envelope across the polished wood. The sound of the paper sliding against the desk was a whisper that screamed of finality. "Sign them," he had said, his voice devoid of any warmth. I remember setting my tea down, my hands already starting to shake for reasons I couldn't explain. I opened the envelope, divorce papers. The words swam before my eyes, nonsensical and cruel, but that wasn't the blow that killed me. Underneath the divorce decree was a second document, an eviction notice for my gallery. The gallery I had built from the ground up, the gallery that housed my soul. I don't understand, I had stammered, my breath catching in my throat. The gallery is mine. My inheritance paid for it. Julian had finally looked at me then, and the look in his eyes was one of bored contempt. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a stack of financial records. Was yours, he corrected. You signed the transfer of ownership last week, along with the power of attorney that allowed me to liquidate the joint assets to cover outstanding debts. I grabbed the papers, my fingers tearing at the edges. There, at the bottom of every page, was my signature. The loops were perfect. The slant was identical. It was my name written in my hand, but I had never seen these documents before in my life. The room spun. I felt bile rise in my throat. He had forged them. He had spent months, maybe years, perfecting my signature just for this moment. You forged these, I whispered, the horror cold and heavy in my stomach. You stole my inheritance. Prove it, he said simply. He stood up, towering over me, just as he is towering over me now in this ballroom. You have a history of instability, Octavia. Who will the courts believe? The successful real estate mogul or the frantic wife who can't manage her own finances? He didn't just leave me, he systematically dismantled me. He left me with a pile of debt attached to a shell company he had created in my name. I remember the way he checked his watch, as if destroying my life was merely an appointment he needed to wrap up. When I asked him, tears streaming down my face, how I was supposed to survive, how I was supposed to eat, he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. You're a resourceful girl, he had said, walking past me to the door. Figure it out, but have your things out of the house by noon. The locks are being changed. That memory hits me with the force of a physical blow. The helplessness, the absolute crushing betrayal by the one person I would have died for. Now back in the present, the nausea returns, sharp and acidic. I look at Julian's face in the ballroom, and I see the same man who watched me cry that day and felt nothing. He stands here, clutching his new prize, looking at me as if I am nothing more than a stain on the marble floor that he missed during cleaning. I am shaking. I can feel the tremors running from my shoulders down to my fingertips. The water in my glass ripples, threatening to spill again. I am trapped in the memory of his cruelty, paralyzed by the realization that he won. He took my money, my reputation, and my confidence, and he used it to buy the tuxedo he is wearing right now. But then the deep voice behind me speaks again, pulling me out of the nightmare. I asked if there was a problem. The air pressure in the room seems to drop even further. I force myself to turn fully, tearing my eyes away from Julian's smirk. The man standing there is a wall of dark, expensive fabric. I have to tilt my head back to look him in the eye. He is tall, taller than Julian, with broad shoulders that seem to block out the harsh lights of the chandeliers. His face is hard angles and shadows, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes are the color of a stormy sea, dark, intense, and currently fixed on Julian with terrifying precision. I recognize him. My breath hitches in my throat. Everyone in the city recognizes him, though he is rarely seen at events like this. Elias Thorne, no relation to me despite the name. He is the billionaire owner of the Thorne conglomeration, a man known for hostile takeovers and a ruthlessness that makes Wall Street tremble. He is a predator in a world of scavengers, and he is standing 2 feet away from me. Julian's smirk evaporates instantly. His posture changes, shifting from arrogant to deferential in a split second. He recognizes the hierarchy of power immediately. Julian might be rich, but Elias is a titan. Mr. Thorne, Julian says, his voice pitching slightly higher than usual. He extends a hand, but Elias doesn't take it. Elias doesn't even look at the hand. He keeps his gaze locked on Julian's face, his expression unreadable and cold. I was just catching up with an old acquaintance, Julian stammers, dropping his hand awkwardly to his side. Kala looks between the two men, sensing the danger, her fingers tightening on the sapphire necklace. Elias finally shifts his gaze. He looks down at me. For a second, I am terrified he is going to join in the mockery, that he will see the frayed hem of my dress and the desperation in my eyes and laugh just like Julian did. I brace myself for another blow. I want to shrink away, to hide the water stain on my hand, to disappear. But his eyes don't mock. They scan my face, taking in the pale skin, the trembling lips, the sheer exhaustion etched into my features. He looks at the water glass I'm clutching like a lifeline. Then he looks back at Julian and his eyes narrow slightly. It didn't look like catching up, Elias says. His voice is low, vibrating through the floorboards, quiet but commanding absolute silence from the onlookers. It looked like harassment. My heart stops. The word hangs in the air, harassment. Nobody has ever defended me against Julian. Nobody has ever called him out. They all just watched like they are watching now. Julian laughs nervously, a bead of sweat appearing on his temple. Oh, come now. Octavia and I have a history. We were just joking. Octavia knows how to take a joke, don't you, dear? Julian looks at me, his eyes widening slightly, a silent threat in his gaze. Play along, his eyes say. Don't make a scene. I open my mouth to speak, to obey the conditioning of 10 years of marriage, to smooth things over and apologize for existing. But the words die in my throat. I look at Elias. He is waiting. He isn't looking at me with pity. He is looking at me with expectation. He is waiting to see if I will break. I think of the divorce papers. I think of the eviction notice. I think of the empty house and the cold rain on the day I left. No, I whisper, my voice is shaky, but it is audible. Julian freezes. No, I say again, louder this time. I look directly at Julian, my knuckles white on the glass. It wasn't a joke. He was mocking me. He was reminding me that he stole everything I ever owned. The crowd gasps. The sound is like a sudden intake of breath from 100 people at once. Julian's face goes beet red. Octavia, you're being hysterical, Julian hisses, stepping forward aggressively. Elias moves. It is a subtle motion, just a single step, but he places himself directly between me and Julian. He is a human shield, a fortress of black wool and raw power. He looks down at Julian, and the temperature in the room seems to hit absolute zero. I think, Elias says, his voice deadly calm, that you should apologize to the lady, and then I think you should leave. My heart is pounding so hard I can hear it in my ears. I stare at the broad back of the stranger who just stepped into the line of fire for me. I don't know why he is doing this. I don't know what he wants. But as I stand in his shadow, for the first time in 6 months, I don't feel exposed. I feel seen. I'm Octavia Thorne, 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was the proud owner of the most prestigious contemporary art gallery in Manhattan before my life was stolen from me with the stroke of a pen. The command from Elias hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking, apologize. It was a simple word, but to a man like Julian, it was a declaration of war. I watched the color drain from Julian's face, only to be replaced by a blotchy, uneven flush of suppressed rage. He looked at Elias, then at me, and for a fleeting second I thought he might actually bow his head and retreat. I thought the weight of a billionaire's disapproval might finally be enough to crush his ego. I was wrong. A slow, serpentine smile spread across Julian's lips, the kind that never reached his eyes. He didn't step back. Instead, he reached out to a passing waiter and snatched a flute of champagne, the crystal stem looking fragile in his gripping fingers. He turned away from Elias, effectively dismissing the most powerful man in the room, and faced the crowd of onlookers who had gathered like vultures sensing a kill. Apologize? Julian's voice boomed, artificially jovial, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. Mr. Thorne is right, I have been remiss. He raised the glass high. The golden liquid caught the light of the chandeliers, sparkling like the jewels I had been forced to pawn just to pay for a motel room last week. The room went deathly quiet. The silence wasn't respectful, it was hungry. Every socialite, every business tycoon, every person I had once called a friend or colleague turned their eyes toward us. I felt the collective weight of their gaze like a physical pressure on my chest, compressing my lungs until I had to fight for every shallow breath. I shouldn't be joking about Octavia's situation, Julian continued, his eyes locking onto mine with a predatory glint that made my blood run cold. After all, transitions are hard. Moving from a penthouse to, well, wherever you are staying now must be a shock. A few people chuckled. It was a low, cruel sound that rippled through the ballroom. My stomach twisted into a hard knot. I wanted to run, but my feet felt leaden, fused to the marble floor. So, Julian announced, his voice rising to a theatrical crescendo, in the spirit of benevolence, and to show that there are no hard feelings, I am making a pledge tonight. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space, forcing me to smell the expensive scotch on his breath and the cloying scent of his cologne, a scent I used to associate with safety, now reeking of betrayal. I am donating $50,000 to the St. Jude's shelter for destitute women, he declared, pausing for effect. And I'm making the donation in Octavia's name. The punchline landed. The room erupted. It wasn't a roar of applause for charity, it was a wave of laughter. They understood exactly what he was doing. He wasn't being generous. He was publicly branding me as a charity case. He was telling the elite of New York that his ex-wife, the woman who once curated the finest art in the city, was now one step away from a homeless shelter. The laughter felt like needles under my skin, thousands of tiny, pricking points of heat. I felt the blood rush to my face, a burning mask of humiliation that I couldn't hide. My hands, still clutching my water glass, shook so violently that water sloshed over the rim, dripping onto the faded silk of my old dress, darkening the fabric like tears. Kala chose that moment to move. She glided forward, her movements fluid and predatory, her sequined gown shimmering like fish scales. She leaned in close, invading the sanctuary of my misery. Her lips brushed my ear, wet and cold. "You should be grateful for the handout, Octavia," she whispered, her voice a hiss of pure venom masked as concern. "Honestly, look at you. You look so haggard, at least now you can afford a hot meal." She pulled back, flashing a bright, camera-ready smile at the onlookers, playing the part of the supportive new wife while she twisted the knife in my gut. I couldn't breathe. The air in the ballroom felt thin, insufficient. I looked around the room, desperate for a friendly face, but all I saw were phones. Dozens of them, raised in the air, their black lenses like unblinking eyes, recording my shame in high definition. They were live streaming my destruction. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. This wasn't an accidental run-in. Julian hadn't just bumped into me. He knew I would be here. He knew I was desperate enough to attend a free gala for the networking. This entire evening was a trap. It was a stage he had built specifically to bury my reputation so deep that I would never be able to crawl back out. He wanted to ensure that no investor would ever touch me, that no gallery would ever hire me, that I would remain the unstable ex-wife he had painted me to be. My vision blurred at the edges. The sound of the laughter distorted, becoming a grotesque, roaring ocean in my ears. I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal sound of fury and absolute despair, but my jaw was locked tight. I was going to pass out. I was going to collapse right here on the floor, and they would step over me while they drank their champagne. I looked at Julian. He was sipping his drink, watching me over the rim of the glass with a look of supreme satisfaction. He had won. He had taken my money, my legacy, and now my dignity. But then I felt a shift in the atmosphere. A sudden drop in temperature at my back. I had forgotten about the wall of black wool standing behind me. I had forgotten that Elias Thorne was still there. He hadn't moved. He hadn't laughed. And as the echoes of Julian's mockery bounced off the walls, I realized with a jolt of terror that Elias hadn't stepped aside either. The air around him seemed to crackle, charged with a dark, violent energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. Julian lowered his glass, his smile faltering slightly as he looked past me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I was frozen in the amber of my own humiliation, but I heard Elias move. It was the sound of a heavy step on marble, deliberate and terrifyingly calm. "Is that the best you can do?" Elias' voice cut through the laughter like a guillotine blade. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a resonance that silenced the room instantly. The phones didn't lower, but the giggling stopped. "You think poverty is a punchline?" Elias asked. He walked past me, moving into the center of the circle, placing himself directly in Julian's face. He was taller, broader, and infinitely more dangerous. "You steal a woman's life, forge her signature, throw her onto the street, and then you stand here in a tuxedo bought with her money and laugh about it." The silence that followed was absolute. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Forge her signature." He said it. He said it out loud. Julian's face went white. "Now see here, Thorne, that's slander." "It's only slander if it's not true," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, turning into a growl that vibrated in the floorboards beneath my feet. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Time seemed to slow down. I watched Elias' hand emerge. He wasn't holding a weapon, he was holding a phone. "I don't like bullies, Julian," Elias said, tapping the screen with his thumb. "And I really don't like thieves. So while you were making your little speech, I made a transaction." Elias turned the phone around so Julian could see the screen. I craned my neck, my vision swimming, trying to focus on the glowing display. "I just bought the debt on your real estate portfolio," Elias said, his voice devoid of emotion. "All of it. The loans, the liens, the leveraged assets. The bank was very happy to unload such high-risk paper." Julian dropped his champagne glass. Shattered on the floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the silent room. Shards of crystal skittered across the marble, glittering in the harsh light. "You can't do that," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "I just did," Elias replied coldly. "I own you, Julian. I own your buildings. I own your company. And as of 30 seconds ago, I own the mortgage on the house you're currently sleeping in." Elias took a step forward, forcing Julian to stumble back, crunching over the broken glass. "And I'm calling in the debt," Elias said softly. "Immediately. I'm Octavia Vane, 29, and until 6 months ago, I was the youngest head curator in the history of the Sterling Gallery, before my life was systematically dismantled." The laughter wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical force, a tidal wave of derision crashing over my head, threatening to drown me right there on the ballroom floor. Julian's smirk was the lighthouse guiding this storm, and Kala's whisper was the jagged rock waiting to tear me apart. I felt my throat close up, a violent spasm that choked off my air supply. My skin burned as if I were standing in the center of a bonfire. I couldn't stay here, not for another second. I didn't care about networking. I didn't care about my reputation. I just wanted to survive. I spun around, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, blinded by the hot, stinging tears that had finally spilled over. I needed the exit. I needed air. I needed to vanish before I screamed. I took one desperate, stumbling step and slammed into a wall. But it wasn't a wall, it was a chest. A chest that felt like a slab of solid granite wrapped in expensive wool. The impact jarred my teeth. The breath left my lungs in a sharp whoosh. My hand, slick with sweat and tremors, lost its grip on the cheap glass of water I had been clinging to like a lifeline. Time seemed to freeze as I watched the glass tumble. It hit the floor with a wet thud, bouncing once and launching its contents upward in a chaotic arc. Ice water splashed across the pristine white dress shirt of the man I had just assaulted. The fabric turned translucent instantly, clinging to the hard muscle beneath, the dark stains spreading like ink on parchment. The silence that fell over our immediate vicinity was heavier than the laughter had been. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. I had just doused a guest at the most exclusive gala of the year. In my current state, disheveled, humiliated, destitute, this was the final nail in my coffin. I'm so sorry, I stammered, my voice cracking, barely audible over the rushing of blood in my ears. I reached out instinctively, as if my trembling hands could somehow dry the water, but I pulled back just as quickly, terrified to touch him. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. I squeezed my eyes shut for a heartbeat, bracing myself. I waited for the shout. I waited for the insult. I waited for him to push me away in disgust, just like Julian would have done, just like everyone in this room would have done. But the shout never came. Slowly, painfully, I forced my eyes open. I looked up. And up, he was massive. He towered over me, broad-shouldered and imposing, radiating a kind of silent, dark power that made the air around him feel charged with electricity. He wasn't looking at the stain on his chest. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at me. I found myself locked in the gaze of the coldest, most piercing gray eyes I had ever seen. They were the color of a winter storm, intense and unyielding. His face was hard angles and sharp lines, a visage carved from marble, utterly unreadable. He looked like a king who had descended among peasants and found himself displeased with the scenery. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared down at me with an intensity that stopped my breath in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Why wasn't he yelling? Why wasn't he mocking me? I didn't see you, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, leaving only exhaustion. Please, I'm leaving. I tried to step around him to flee into the night and let the darkness swallow me whole. But he moved. It wasn't a shove. It wasn't an attack. He simply shifted his weight, effectively blocking my path with his sheer size. His hand, large and warm, shot out and clamped around my upper arm. It wasn't a painful grip, but it was unbreakable. It was an anchor. You aren't going anywhere, he said. His voice was a deep, rough baritone that vibrated through my bones. It wasn't angry, it was authoritative. It was the voice of a man who gave orders and expected them to be followed without question. I froze, trembling under his touch. I looked back up at him, confused, terrified. Was he going to hold me here so Julian could finish his game? Was he going to demand payment for the shirt? Then he looked past me. His gray eyes shifted, narrowing slightly as they locked onto something over my shoulder. The temperature in the space between us seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Is that him?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. I followed his gaze. He was looking directly at Julian. And for the first time all night, Julian wasn't smiling. I'm Octavia Cross, 29, and before I was a cautionary tale in a thrift store dress, I was the art restoration prodigy who brought the Vatican's Pietà back to life with my own two hands. The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Is that him? The man standing before me didn't wait for an answer. He didn't need one. He simply held my gaze, his gray eyes acting as a physical weight that pinned me to the spot. I was still trembling, my heart throwing itself against my ribs in a frantic, disjointed rhythm. But the terror that had been consuming me a moment ago was suddenly replaced by a confusing, overwhelming jolt of electricity. I tried to pull my arm back, conscious of the cheap fabric of my dress under his tailored wool sleeve, conscious of the water dripping down his chest, conscious of the ruin I had just caused. "The shirt," I whispered, my voice hitching. "I've ruined your shirt. I can't pay for it. I have nothing." He didn't even blink. He didn't look down. It was as if the stain, a disaster that would have sent a lesser man into a rage, didn't exist in his reality. "I didn't ask about the shirt," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a subterranean sound that I felt in the soles of my feet. It vibrated through my entire body, making the fine hairs on my arms stand up. Then the murmurs started. It began as a ripple near the bar, a collective intake of breath that swept through the ballroom like a draft. The laughter that had been directed at me moments ago died a sudden, choking death. Champagne glasses were lowered. Heads turned. The atmosphere in the room shifted from mockery to a heavy, suffocating reverence. "Oh my God," someone whispered to my left. "Is that—" "It is," another voice hissed. "It's him, it's Silas Vane." My breath hitched. The name hit me like a physical blow. Silas Vane, the recluse, the tech titan who had vanished from the public eye 3 years ago to build a private art collection that rivaled the Louvre. He was a ghost story in the art world, a man of infinite wealth and zero patience for society. He never attended galas, he never gave interviews. And I had just thrown ice water on him. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I braced myself for security to drag me away. I braced myself for the public eviction that would surely be the final headline of my destroyed life. But Silas Vane didn't call for security. Slowly, deliberately, he slid his hand down from my arm to my hand. His fingers were rough, warm, and calloused, the hands of a man who built things, not just bought them. He laced his fingers through mine, his grip firm and possessive, anchoring me to the earth when I felt like I was floating away. He turned. He didn't step aside, he pivoted, pulling me with him, forcing me to face the room, forcing me to face Julian. Julian was standing 10 feet away, his smirk frozen on his face, rapidly curdling into an expression of dawn-breaking horror. Calla, his new wife, looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the chandeliers. Silas looked at Julian. He didn't shout, he didn't posture. He simply looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a particularly repellent insect. "You," Silas said, one word. It landed like a gavel. Julian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Mr. Vane, I didn't realize you were attending. If this woman has bothered you, I can have her removed. She's mentally unstable, you see, a tragedy really." I flinched. The lie stung, familiar and rot-filled. I tried to pull my hand away, shame burning my cheeks, but Silas tightened his grip. He didn't let me go. He pulled me closer until my shoulder brushed against the solid wall of his chest. "Unstable," Silas repeated, testing the word. He looked down at me then. The harshness in his eyes softened just a fraction, just for me. It was a look of recognition, intense and piercing, as if he was seeing the layers of trauma I wore like a second skin, and dismissing them to see the woman underneath. "Tell me, Octavia," Silas said, his voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the room. Why is the woman who restored the Vatican Pieta letting a mid-level fraud like Julian breathe her air? My heart stopped. He knew. He didn't see the disgraced ex-wife. He didn't see the bankrupt failure. He saw the work. He saw me. A gasp went through the crowd. I felt tears prick my eyes again, but these weren't tears of humiliation. They were the hot, stinging tears of sudden, violent vindication. I I choked out, unable to form a sentence. Silas looked back at Julian. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. I own 3 Rembrandts, Julian. Do you know who consulted on the preservation of all of them? Julian was pale now, his skin the color of old paste. I know. She did, Silas said, lifting our joined hands slightly. Her hands are worth more than your entire portfolio, and you speak of her as if she is debris. Silas took a step forward, dragging me with him. The crowd parted instantly, terrifyingly obedient. We were moving into Julian's space, invading it, conquering it. I don't like waste, Julian, Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, predatory growl. And I don't like men who break things they cannot afford to replace. It was just a misunderstanding, Julian stammered, backing up, crunching on the glass from his own dropped drink. We were just joking. I'm not laughing, Silas said. He turned his back on Julian, dismissing him completely, as if he were no longer worthy of existence. Silas looked down at me, his thumb brushing the trembling skin of my knuckles. The sensation sent a shockwave of heat straight to my core, overriding the fear, overriding the shame. You're shaking, he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. I'm terrified, I admitted, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. Don't be, he said. Not anymore. He looked up, scanning the room, challenging anyone to meet his eye. No one did. Octavia is my guest for the evening, Silas announced. His tone made it clear that this was not a social nicety, it was a decree. And I believe we require fresh drinks, somewhere with better company. He tugged on my hand, and for the first time in 6 months I didn't stumble. I walked. I walked beside the most powerful man in the city, leaving the shards of my past on the floor behind me. I'm Octavia Cross, 29, and before I was the woman holding the match to my ex-husband's empire, I was the art restoration prodigy who could identify a pigment's origin by scent alone. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind us, severing the noise of the ballroom as cleanly as a guillotine blade. The silence that followed was sudden and ringing. Silas didn't let go of my hand until we reached the edge of the stone balustrade. We were high up, suspended in the cool night air above the city. Below us, the grid of the streets glowed gold and amber, the lights twinkling like scattered diamonds on black velvet. I gripped the cold stone railing, my knuckles white, gasping for air that didn't smell like expensive perfume and judgment. My legs felt like water. The adrenaline that had marched me out of that room was fading, leaving behind the violent tremors of shock. Breathe, Silas said. He wasn't looking at the view. He was leaning against a stone pillar, watching me. The wind ruffled his dark hair, but he looked immovable, solid. I can't, I choked out, my voice sounding thin and brittle in the open air. He's going to ruin me. Again, he'll tell everyone I'm crazy. He'll sue me for the scene I just caused. He won't, Silas replied. His tone was terrifyingly calm. You don't know him, I argued, wrapping my arms around myself to ward off the chill. Julian is vindictive. He owns the press in this city. He owns the galleries. He owns nothing, Silas corrected. He pushed off the pillar and took a step toward me. The space on the balcony shrank instantly. I didn't stumble into you by accident, Octavia. I froze. The wind whipped a strand of hair across my face, but I didn't move to brush it away. I stared at him, my heart skipping a dangerous beat. What? I whispered. I've been looking for you for 3 months, he said. The confession hung between us, heavy and confusing. Looking for me, why? I took a step back, my back pressing against the rough stone of the railing. I'm nobody. I'm a disgraced restorer working retail. You are the only person alive who knows the truth about the Madonna of the Weeping Willow, he said. The name of the painting hit me like a physical slap. My stomach dropped through the floor. That's the lost masterpiece, I stammered. Julian found it in a devastating condition. He's unveiling it at the auction on Friday. It's going to make him millions. Silas watched me, his gray eyes stripping away my defenses. It isn't lost, Octavia, and Julian didn't find it. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a slim leather-bound folder. It looked old, weathered, and smelled of tobacco and secrets. He held it out to me. Open it. My hands shook as I took the folder. The leather was warm from his body heat. I opened it, and the paper inside rustled in the wind. It was a chemical analysis report. Carbon dating. Pigment stratification. I scanned the numbers, my brain shifting automatically into professional mode. I knew these compounds. I knew this lead white mixture. I frowned, reading the breakdown of the base layer. This contains a polymer binding agent that wasn't invented until 1994. Correct, Silas said softly. But that means the painting is a fake, I breathed, looking up at him. A modern forgery. A perfect forgery, Silas amended. The kind that fools the eye, the soul, and the initial tests, but not the deep scan. He took a step closer, towering over me, shielding me from the wind. Look at the photo on the next page, Octavia. I turned the page. It was a high-resolution macro shot of the brushwork on the Madonna's left hand. My breath hitched, the world tilted on its axis. I knew those strokes. I knew the hesitation in the thumb, the specific, unorthodox layering of the glaze on the fingernail. It was a technique I had developed myself, a flaw in my training that I had turned into a signature style, invisible to the naked eye but glaringly obvious to me. I painted this, I whispered. The horror was cold and absolute, flooding my veins like ice water. 3 years ago, Silas said, during your convalescence after the accident. Memories flashed in my mind, fragmented, painful shards. Julian locking me in the studio. Julian telling me I needed to practice my classical techniques to regain my motor skills. Julian bringing me old canvases and telling me to copy the masters. Just for therapy, darling, just to get your hands working again. He had stolen my work. He had aged it, distressed it, and framed it as a discovery. He used me, I said, the realization agonizing. He made me forge a masterpiece without me even knowing it. He is selling it for $40 million on Friday, Silas said. He is selling a crime, and he is using your genius to do it. I snapped the folder shut, feeling sick. If I say anything, he'll say I'm lying. He'll say I'm just the bitter ex-wife trying to sabotage him. No one will believe me. They won't believe you, Silas agreed, his voice dropping to a low, lethal rumble. But they will believe us. He placed his hands on the railing on either side of me, boxing me in. He wasn't touching me, but his presence was everywhere. I have the science, Silas said, nodding at the folder in my hands. I have the capital to buy the auction house if I have to, but I need the artist. I need the woman who knows where the bodies are buried because she held the shovel. He looked deep into my eyes, and for the first time I saw a flicker of shared anger in his gaze. He wasn't just a savior, he was a weapon. And he was offering himself to me. I have the resources to burn Julian's empire to the ground, Octavia. I can strip him of his reputation, his money, and his freedom. By Monday morning, he will be nothing but a footnote in a cautionary tale. My heart hammered against my ribs, but the fear was gone. It was replaced by a surge of heat that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "Stand beside me," Silas said. "Walk into that auction on Friday. Authenticate the fraud in front of the world. Destroy him." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered on my jawline, rough and electrifying. "He tried to break you," Silas whispered. "Let's show him what you're actually made of." I looked down at the leather folder in my hands. It wasn't just paper, it was a detonator. I looked back at the city lights, then up at the man who had pulled me from the wreckage. I tightened my grip on the leather. "Friday," I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. "Let's burn it down." I'm Octavia Cross, 29, and for the last 30 days I haven't been a woman, I've been a blade being sharpened on a whetstone of pure rage. Silas didn't take me back to my cramped apartment that night. He didn't take me to a hotel. He drove me straight into the belly of the beast, to an estate that sat on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, a fortress of glass and dark stone that screamed impenetrable power. "You don't leave here," Silas told me as the heavy iron gates slammed shut behind us, sealing out the world, the press, and Julian. "You disappear, you become a ghost, and when you reappear you will be the thing they fear most." I took his instructions literally. For a month, Octavia the victim ceased to exist. I deleted my social media apps. I turned off my phone. I stopped looking at the tabloids that were undoubtedly speculating about the hysterical woman who had caused a scene at the gala. I lived in the library. It was a cavernous room, smelling of cedar and old leather, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the crashing gray waves of the Atlantic. This was my command center. Silas provided everything. He brought in a team of forensic accountants who looked like sharks in Italian suits. He hired private investigators who could find a needle in a haystack of needles. But the center of the operation was me. My days became a blur of ink and evidence. I woke up at dawn, my body drenched in sweat from nightmares where Julian was locking me in the studio again, but I didn't cry. I didn't curl up in a ball. I got up. I showered until the water ran cold. I dressed in the clothes Silas had ordered for me, cashmere sweaters that felt like armor, silk trousers that moved like water. Then I went to work. I reconstructed the timeline of my recovery. I pulled up the dates of my surgeries. I cross-referenced them with Julian's business trips and the sudden influx of cash into his offshore accounts. The accountants found the money, but I found the lies. "Look at this," I said one Tuesday, my voice echoing in the quiet library. I didn't need to look up to know Silas was there. He was always there. He had moved his entire operation to the estate, working silently from a wingback chair in the corner. He stood up and walked over to the massive oak table where I had spread out the autopsy of my marriage. I pointed to a shipping manifest. He listed the Madonna as a family heirloom for insurance purposes 3 months before he found it in the attic. He knew. He planned the discovery before the paint was even dry. Silas leaned over my shoulder. I could feel the heat radiating off his chest, a stark contrast to the cold calculation on the papers in front of me. He smelled of sandalwood and danger. "He got sloppy," Silas murmured, his breath stirring the loose hair at my temple. "Arrogance makes men careless." "He didn't think anyone would look," I said, my finger tracing the signature on the document. "He thought I was too broken to notice and everyone else was too bought to care." "He was right," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. "Until now." He reached out, his large hand covering mine on the table. For the first time in weeks, I looked at my own hand. In the ballroom, I had been trembling so hard I couldn't hold a champagne flute. My nerves had been shot, fried by years of gaslighting and emotional erosion. But now, my hand was perfectly still beneath his. I turned my hand over, interlocking my fingers with his. His grip was firm, grounding, possessive. "I'm not shaking," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "No," Silas said, his gray eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin flush. "You aren't." He didn't pull away. He held my gaze, stripping me down, seeing past the forensic accountant and the art prodigy straight to the woman who was burning alive from the inside out. "You're ready," he stated. "Not yet," I countered, pulling my hand back slowly, deliberately. "I need the pigment analysis from the 2021 batch. If I can prove he bought the lead white from a supplier in Belgium, the entire provenance falls apart." A corner of Silas's mouth ticked up. It wasn't a smile, it was a grimace of dark pride. "I'll have it by morning." The transformation wasn't just mental, it was physical. Silas had a chef who prepared meals designed to build strength. I ate with a hunger I hadn't felt in years. My hollow cheeks filled out. The dark circles under my eyes vanished, replaced by a clear, sharp gaze that missed nothing. I started running along the cliff edge in the mornings, pushing my lungs until they burned, teaching my body that pain was just information, not a stop sign. I was becoming the weapon Silas promised I would be. 3 days before the auction, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. We had the bank transfers, we had the supplier emails, we had the chemical proof that the painting was a modern creation. I sat back in the leather chair, the final dossier thick and heavy in my lap. Silas walked in. He was holding a garment bag. "The armor," he said, hanging it on the brass hook of the library door. I stood up and walked over to it. I unzipped the bag. It wasn't a suit, it was a dress. It was a floor-length gown of midnight blue velvet, dark enough to look black in the shadows but radiating a deep royal sapphire under the light. It was backless, severe, and utterly terrifying. It was a dress designed for a queen who was coming to execute a traitor. "Julian expects the victim," Silas said, standing behind me, his reflection joining mine in the dark window glass. "He expects the woman in the cardigan who apologizes for taking up space." I reached out and touched the velvet. It was soft, but the construction underneath was rigid, structured, unbreakable. "He won't recognize me," I said softly. "Good," Silas replied. He stepped closer, his hands hovering near my waist but not touching, the magnetic pull between us stronger than gravity. "Tomorrow night we walk into that auction house," Silas said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my spine. "We sit in the front row, and when the gavel goes up you bring it down." I turned to face him. The space between us was charged, electric with the violence of what we were about to do and the undeniable chemistry that had been simmering in this house for 30 days. "I want to see his face," I said. "When he realizes it's over, I want to be the last thing he sees before he loses everything." Silas's eyes darkened. He reached up and brushed his thumb across my lower lip, a touch so light it felt like a brand. "You will," he promised, "and I'll be right there to watch him fall." I looked at the dossier on the desk, then at the dress, then at the man who had given me the match. I wasn't Octavia the victim anymore. I wasn't even Octavia the survivor. I was the demolition crew. "Let's go to sleep," I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding a war drum against my ribs. "I need to be well rested for a funeral. I'm Octavia Cross, 29, and tonight I am wearing the price of a small island to watch my ex-husband's life implode." The midnight silk felt less like fabric and more like liquid mercury against my skin. It was cool to the touch, heavy, and slithered over my body with every breath I took. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the dressing room of Silas's estate, but I didn't recognize the reflection staring back at me. The woman in the glass wasn't the trembling artist who had begged Julian for scraps of affection. She wasn't the patient who had woken up in a hospital bed with a hazy memory and a broken spirit. She was a predator. The gown was backless, plunging dangerously low, held up by nothing but precision engineering and sheer audacity. My hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun to keep paint out of my eyes, was now a sleek, dark river cascading over one shoulder. My lips were painted a deep crimson, a shade that looked like fresh blood. I heard the door click open behind me. I didn't jump, I didn't flinch. I watched in the mirror as Silas Vane walked into the room. He stopped dead. Silas was a man who had seen everything. He had bought companies, destroyed rivals, and walked through the fires of the global elite without singeing his suit. But as his gray eyes swept over me, I saw his composure crack. He didn't say a word. He walked up behind me, his dark tuxedo perfectly tailored, his presence filling the room like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. He met my gaze in the glass. "Dangerous," he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. "That was the point, wasn't it?" I asked, turning to face him. "No," Silas said, reaching out to fasten a diamond necklace around my throat. The stones were cold, heavy, and blindingly bright. The point was to make him regret this. This will make him wish he were dead. He rested his hands on my bare shoulders. His thumbs traced the line of my collarbone, sending a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "Are you ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath, inhaling his scent of sandalwood and rain. "I've been ready for 3 years," I replied. The drive to the auction house was silent. The interior of the limousine was a cocoon of leather and tinted glass, sealing us away from the city that was about to witness a massacre. My hand rested on the seat between us. Silas covered it with his own. His grip was firm, grounding. It was a reminder that I wasn't walking into the lion's den alone. I was walking in with the lion tamer. When the car stopped, the flashes started. Even through the tinted windows, the explosion of camera lights was blinding. This was the event of the season, the unveiling of Julian's masterpiece, the culmination of his fraud. Every art critic, billionaire collector, and society vulture was inside, waiting to fawn over him. The driver opened the door. Silas stepped out first. The roar of the crowd spiked, a wave of noise that crashed against the pavement. He buttoned his jacket, turned, and extended his hand into the dark interior of the car. I took it. I stepped out into the night air. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the clicking of shutters. Then a murmur started, a low ripple of shock that spread outward from the red carpet. They recognized Silas, of course, but they were trying to place me. "Is that? No, it can't be. She's supposed to be in a sanitarium. She's supposed to be broken." I lifted my chin. I let the midnight silk flow around me as I walked. I didn't look at the cameras. I looked straight ahead at the golden doors of the auction house. "Head up," Silas whispered, leaning close enough that his lips brushed my ear. "You own this room." We walked through the grand entrance. The air inside smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and champagne. The chatter was deafening, a cacophony of performative laughter and business deals. Then we entered the main ballroom. It happened in slow motion. The crowd parted for Silas like the Red Sea. We walked down the center aisle, heading straight for the front row, the seats reserved for the buyers who didn't need to ask the price. And there he was. Julian stood near the podium, holding a crystal flute of champagne, laughing at something a board member was saying. He looked golden, handsome, untouchable. He was basking in the glow of his own lie. He felt the shift in the room before he saw us. He sensed the sudden gravity pulling everyone's attention away from him. He turned his head. His smile was still in place, a practiced expression of charm. Then his eyes locked onto Sela's. His smile faltered slightly. Sela's vein was a threat to anyone's ego. Then his gaze slid to me. I saw the exact moment his soul left his body. The color didn't just drain from his face, it vanished, leaving him a sickly, waxen shade of gray. His hand jerked, and champagne sloshed over the rim of his glass, dripping onto his expensive Italian shoes. He didn't even notice. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he was witnessing a resurrection. I didn't stop, I didn't glare, I didn't scream. I offered him the smallest, coldest smile I could muster. A smile that said, I know. I walked right past him. I was close enough to touch him. I could smell his cologne, the same scent he'd worn the night he had me committed. It used to make me nauseous. Now it just smelled like fear. I sat down in the front row, arranging the silk of my dress with deliberate, agonizing slowness. Silas sat next to me, crossing his long legs, looking like a king on his throne. The entire room was staring at the back of my head. I could feel their whispers crawling over my skin. That's his wife. I thought they were divorced. Why is she with Vane? Julian was still standing there, frozen. A handler had to gently touch his arm to snap him out of it. He jerked, looking around wildly, his composure fracturing like cheap glass. He tried to set his glass down on a table, but his hand was shaking so badly he missed the coaster. The clatter of crystal on wood echoed in the sudden quiet. He looked at me again. He was pleading with his eyes, trying to understand, trying to calculate how much danger he was in. He saw the folder resting on Silas's lap. He saw the way Silas's arm was draped along the back of my chair, a protective barrier that Julian could never breach. The auctioneer stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We are about to begin the bidding for tonight's feature presentation. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the veiled easel on the stage. Julian stumbled back to his designated spot in the wings. I could see the sweat beads forming on his forehead, glistening under the stage lights. He loosened his tie. He couldn't breathe. I leaned back, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure victory against my ribs. "Show time," I whispered. Silas took my hand in the dark. "Watch him burn," he replied. "I'm Octavia Cross, 29, and I am the architect of my ex-husband's destruction." The air in the auction house was thin, recycled, and smelled of desperation masked by Chanel No. 5. I sat in the front row, my spine fused to the velvet chair, watching Julian play the part of the magnate he so desperately wanted to be. He was sweating. I could see the sheen of moisture on his upper lip from 10 feet away, glistening under the harsh stage lights. Beside him sat the new wife, a waif of a girl named Bella, barely 22, draped in diamonds that I knew were leased. She looked bored, scrolling on her phone, oblivious that she was sitting next to a corpse walking. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like dry parchment, moved through the catalog with rhythmic efficiency. Lot after lot sold for millions. A Ming vase, a Basquiat sketch, a diamond tiara. Then came Lot 45, a sprawling estate in the south of France. "Bidding starts at 12 million, the auctioneer intoned. Julian's hand shot up. A ripple went through the room. This was aggressive. He didn't have $12 million. I knew his accounts better than he did. I had spent the last month dissecting them with Silas's forensic accountants. Julian was leveraging everything on the sale of Lot 50. The forgery he claimed was a lost masterpiece by a 19th-century recluse. He was spending the payout before the check had even cleared. 13 million, a voice from the back called out. Julian turned, his jaw set. He raised his paddle again. 14 million. He looked at me then. It was a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He was trying to show me that he had won, that he had replaced me, that he could buy the world while I watched from the sidelines. He squeezed Bella's hand, performing his happiness for the cameras. My heart didn't race, it slowed. It was the calm of a sniper exhaling before the trigger pull. I felt Silas's hand on my knee, a warm, steady weight. Now, I stood up. The movement was sudden, violent in its grace. The midnight silk of my gown caught the light, rippling like oil. The sound of my chair legs scraping against the floor was a screech that cut through the hushed murmurs of the bidding war. "He can't pay for that," I said. My voice rang like a bell, clear, melodic, lethal. The auctioneer froze, his gavel hovering in mid-air. The entire room swiveled to look at me. Julian's head snapped around, his eyes wide, the color draining from his face until he looked like wet paper. "Excuse me, madam." The auctioneer sputtered, peering over his spectacles. I stepped into the aisle. I held a thick, leather-bound folder in my hand. It felt heavier than it looked. "Julian Vance cannot pay for that estate," I repeated, my voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "Because the funds he is relying on are proceeds from a felony." "Octavia, sit down," Julian hissed, standing up. His voice cracked. "She's unstable. She's been in a mental health facility. Security, get her out of here." He pointed a shaking finger at me, trying to rally the room, trying to spin the narrative he had planted years ago. "I am perfectly sane, Julian," I said, walking toward the stage. "Saner than the man who thought he could paint over my work, sign a dead artist's name to it, and sell it to the highest bidder." A gasp tore through the room. The sound was physical, a vacuum sucking the oxygen out of the space. I reached the foot of the stage and turned to face the board of directors, who were seated in a terrified row to the left. I slammed the folder down on the auctioneer's podium. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This dossier contains distinct spectral analysis of Lot 50, I announced, looking directly into the camera lens of the live stream. "It proves that the pigments used in the masterpiece were manufactured in 2023. It also contains the sworn affidavit of the original artist." "Me," Julian lunged toward me. "You liar, you crazy bitch." But he never reached me. Silas stood up. He didn't shout, he didn't run, he simply raised one hand. From the shadows of the wings, 6 men in windbreakers stepped out. On the back of their jackets, in bold yellow letters, was the word FBI. Julian skidded to a halt. His shoes squeaked on the polished floor. He looked at the agents, then back at the folder, then at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled. He grabbed the edge of the podium to keep from collapsing. "Julian Vance," the lead agent said, his voice booming, "you are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and forgery." The auctioneer, in a state of panic, let his hand drop. The gavel hit the block, bang. It sounded like a death sentence. The agents moved in. They were efficient, brutal in their professionalism. They spun Julian around and slammed him against the wall. The sound of cuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. "No, no, this is a mistake," Julian screamed, his face pressed against the plaster. "She's lying, look at her, she's jealous. Bella, Bella, tell them." I looked at Bella. She was standing by her chair, her face a mask of horror. But it wasn't the horror of a loving wife watching her husband suffer. It was the horror of a parasite realizing the host was dying. She looked at Julian, thrashing in the grip of the agents, and then she looked at me, standing tall, draped in silk, untouchable next to a billionaire. She took a step back, then another. She didn't scream for a lawyer. She didn't run to him. She turned her back on him, grabbed her clutch, and melted into the crowd, looking for the nearest exit. Julian watched her go. I saw the light die in his eyes. It was a total, catastrophic collapse of self. He realized in that split second that he was utterly alone. Silas walked up to me. He stood beside me, a wall of heat and power. He looked down at Julian, who was being hauled to his feet. "I told you," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous, only for us to hear. "I told you that if you ever hurt her again, I would burn your world down to the ash." Julian looked at me. He was crying now, ugly, snot-nosed sobs that ruined his carefully curated image. "Octavia, please." I looked him dead in the eye. I felt my pulse in my throat, steady and strong. "Sold," I whispered. As they dragged him out the side doors, the cameras flashing like strobe lights, I didn't feel the rush of joy I expected. I felt lighter. I felt like I had been holding my breath for 3 years and had finally exhaled. I turned to Silas. The chaos of the room swirled around us, shouting reporters, shocked billionaires, the frantic board members. But in the center of the storm, it was just us. "Did you see it?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. Silas reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His eyes were fierce, proud. "I saw a queen take her throne," he said. He offered me his arm. "Let's go home, Octavia." I'm Octavia Cross, 29, and tonight I reclaimed my name from the ashes of my ex-husband's ego. The elevator ride to the top of the Thorn Vane Tower was a study in silence. My ears popped as we ascended, the numbers on the digital display blurring past, 40, 50, 60. Beside me, Silas stood like a sentinel, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his tie undone, looking like a weary warrior who had just won a war without drawing a blade. I watched my reflection in the polished steel doors. My hair was slightly tousled. My lipstick was still perfect. But my eyes looked different. They were older than they had been this morning. They were harder. The doors slid open with a soft chime. We stepped into the penthouse office, a space of glass and steel that seemed to float above the city. The entire southern wall was a window, offering a panoramic view of the skyline. Below us, the city was a grid of golden arteries, pulsing with traffic and life. Somewhere down there in the grimy processing center of the Federal District Court, Julian was being fingerprinted. He was trading his Italian loafers for orange canvas. I walked straight to the window. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. "It's over," I whispered. The words felt strange in my mouth. For 3 years, over had felt like a destination I could never reach. "It's just beginning," Silas said. I heard the clink of crystal. A moment later, he appeared at my side, offering me a tumbler of amber liquid. My hand shook as I took it. I stared at the tremors in my fingers, annoyed at my body's betrayal. "Adrenaline crash," Silas noted softly. "Drink." I took a sip. The whiskey burned, a grounding heat that spread through my chest and stopped the shaking. I turned away from the window to look at the massive television screen embedded in the opposite wall. It was muted, but the headline was screaming in bold red letters. "Billionaire fraud, Julian Vance arrested in live auction sting." They were playing the footage on a loop. I watched myself step out of the crowd. I watched the way the light caught the silk of my dress. I looked tall. I looked terrifying. And then I watched Julian's face crumble. It wasn't just fear, it was the total disintegration of a narcissist encountering reality for the first time. "He looks so small," I said. "He was always small," Silas replied, leaning against his mahogany desk. "He just stood on your shoulders to make himself look tall." Silas reached for a thick envelope resting on the sleek surface of his desk. He held it out to me. "For you." I hesitated. "What is it? More evidence?" "No," he said. "The spoils of war." I set my drink down and took the envelope. I slid a finger under the seal and pulled out the documents. My breath hitched in my throat. It was a deed. The Cross Gallery. And underneath that, bank transfer confirmations. My inheritance. Every cent Julian had siphoned off into offshore shell companies had been tracked, frozen, and repatriated by Silas's team of forensic accountants. "You bought the building back," I said, my voice trembling. "I acquired the holding company that owned the debt," Silas corrected, his voice devoid of arrogance. "Technically, you bought it back. The funds came from your recovered accounts. I just facilitated the transaction." I ran my thumb over the embossed seal of the gallery. My grandfather built that place. Julian had turned it into a showroom for his vanity, selling soulless prints to clueless investors. Now it was mine again. I looked up at Silas. He was watching me with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thin. He wasn't looking at me like a charity case. He wasn't looking at me like a victim he had saved. He was looking at me like an equal. "Why?" I asked. "You didn't have to go this far. The FBI, the sting, the gallery. Why?" Silas pushed off the desk and closed the distance between us. He stopped inches from me. I could smell the sandalwood and rain scent of his cologne, mixed with the sharp tang of the city night. "Because I know what it's like to have your legacy stolen," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "And because I knew you didn't want to be rescued, Octavia. You wanted to be the one to swing the sword." He was right. I looked back out the window at the sprawling city. For years, I thought I needed a hero. I thought I needed someone to swoop in and pull me out of the pit Julian had thrown me into. I had spent so many nights crying, wishing for a savior. But as I stood there, holding the deed to my life in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other, I realized the truth. Silas hadn't saved me. He had given me the platform. He had handed me the microphone and turned on the lights. But I was the one who walked onto that stage. I was the one who spoke. I was the one who looked the monster in the eye and didn't blink. The best revenge wasn't watching Julian fall. It wasn't seeing Bella run away like a frightened rat. It wasn't even the money. It was this moment, the realization that I was dangerous. Silas moved behind me. I felt the heat of his chest against my back. He didn't embrace me, he just stood there, a solid wall of support, his hand coming up to rest firmly on my shoulder. His thumb brushed the bare skin of my neck, sending a shiver racing down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "What are you thinking?" he murmured into my hair. I looked at our reflection in the glass. The dark king and the resurrected queen. "I'm thinking about the exhibition," I said, my eyes locking with his in the reflection. "I'm going to reopen the gallery next month. No more forgeries, no more lies." And Julian, I watched a police cruiser drive silently through the streets below, its lights flashing red and blue. "Julian who?" I asked. Silas laughed, a low rumble that vibrated against my ribs. He turned me around to face him. His hand moved from my shoulder to cup my cheek. His thumb traced my lower lip. The tension that had been building between us for weeks, through late-night strategy sessions, through panic attacks, through the fire of this evening, suddenly snapped tight. "You are magnificent," he said. I didn't need him to complete me. I was already whole. But standing there in the moonlight, I realized I wanted him to stand beside me. "I don't need a savior, Silas," I whispered, leaning into his touch. "Good," he said, lowering his head until his lips were a breath away from mine. "Because I'm not looking to save anyone, I'm looking for a partner." I closed the gap. As we kissed, high above the city that had once turned its back on my suffering, I felt the final chain break. The victim was gone. Octavia Cross had returned, and this time she was playing for keeps.